So I'm here today with Linsey Rose. She's a middle school teacher in the STEM Magnet Academy in the Chicago Public Schools. Linsey, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Linsey, when students come into your classroom, what kinds of strengths and weaknesses do they have in terms of finding good information on the internet? Like when students come to you, where are they at with these skills?
So my students come to my class in sixth grade, and they typically come without really any actual skills or knowledge of research because while it while research impacts a lot of class, they need to have research skills for many classes. They've never actually been taught anything because it cuts across all those subject matters. Everybody's doing a little bit, but never actually teaching them the skills and the knowledge that they need in order to know how to search and look at sources. So usually they have like some sense of like Wikipedia is not a reliable source that they've heard somewhere, but they don't actually know what to do when they encounter a source.
And how did you encounter the Stanford History Education Group Civic Online Reasoning curriculum? How did you find your way to that material?
In Chicago Public Schools, I work with the civics department. And so we were approached last year asking if we wanted to participate in this pilot opportunity to teach the civics online reasoning.
And how did you integrate it in your curriculum? Like, was it woven throughout a series of units, or did you have kind of one unit that you set aside for just this work? What were the other things that you were teaching around it? Where did it fit for you?
So we were given a suggested sequence, I think, of 5 lessons. And so what I did was I just found days when, as teachers, we have these days where something doesn't fit. And so I kind of found them along the way. So I just taught the lessons at different times, not as an entire unit back to back.
And how did you see students react to the curriculum? Did they pick it up right away? Was it really hard for them? Or what were the parts of it that were hard for them? Or what did they get excited about?
So it was really interesting when we started because I could feel in the classroom that this was a totally different content area. The first lesson we were looking at a website about Cherry Blossom Festival, and we really spent a long time. Like students worked individually, they worked in partnerships, like studying this website to figure out who made it, what's behind it, what's this website trying to do. And they had mostly all decided like this is a reliable source about learning about the Cherry Blossom Festival. So when we found out, like with some more digging, that it was like sponsored content, I mean, the class, we were just like, it was one of those moments where it's like electric with like, what just happened? Because like something that they were so confident in, this is the Washington Post. We think we can trust this. We talked about why we think we can trust the Washington Post. So that then created an environment. It totally changed the classroom because we have those questions. We always came back to who's behind the information. And for the rest of the school year, that was something that I heard kids talk about. That's a question that they knew that they could go to with any topic we were learning about. And they would even go back to that source, that Cherry Blossom Festival from the Washington Post. It's actually sponsored content as this sort of backbone to say like, no, we have to think harder and work harder when we're looking at content. So I think the students were really empowered by learning that they had ways to go about deciding. And as young people, they could make some determinations about whether or not information is reliable.
I mean, I think some of the most powerful things that we do in our teaching generally are when we make the familiar unfamiliar. When we take something that goes, I mean, the moment that you just described of being like, well, isn't this just a Washington Post article? Wait, there's another type of content here that I didn't even know about. Yeah, those really exciting moments when you sort of peel back some layer of the world and get to understand it more deeply. What was difficult for them, or what's still difficult for them as you move through those 5 lessons, or as you see them try to apply these skills afterwards now?
The biggest difficulty that I had was that some of the content is really sophisticated knowing certain things. Like there's a lesson looking at a Twitter post, which was also great. I mean, they're in class looking at Twitter posts and Facebook posts and Instagram posts, and that was a really great moment to show kids that yeah, these things belong in the classroom too, and we can look at those sources that they're engaging with this sort of lens of is this reliable, is this valid information. So we were looking at a tweet that ends up being a parody, and that was really complicated because after I taught it to my first class, I realized like they don't know what a parody is. And a parody is really complicated. I think young people were thinking like either information's reliable or not reliable, it's valid or not valid. And it's like there's all these nuances of information, like that a parody is trying to be funny. Like that type of information, and then also information that is like which way things that are like right leaning or left leaning, kind of that idea of that news outlets or issues could go these sorts of ways. So that's all really nuanced sort of things that I had to think about. How can I build up their knowledge of this so that they can understand the skills behind what we're learning as well?
Yeah, that sounds right to me, that there are a couple of core skills, lateral reading, click restraint, that are generally useful pretty universally. And then for any kind of information literacy task, there's also just more background knowledge that you need to know about, who owns the Washington Post and what's its op-ed page like and what is a parody and how does it work and all those kinds of
Yeah.
things.
And even what is an advertisement? Because there was one that we were looking at, an advertisement, and it ended up being, if you read it closely, it's like from an oil company. And students were even like, well, why would that be a problem? This is an oil company. They're an expert in things like this, topics like this. So if they're talking about environmental issues, they should know what they're talking about. And so yeah, so there's a lot that goes into all those nuances.
As you're approaching your second year, have you thought about other ways that you want to sort of integrate instruction about these nuances with the kinds of things that you're teaching anyway? Like, can you think now of units where some of these lessons would fit particularly well?
Well, where I want to start with when I do this again is even talking about like what is journalism, like talking about the media. And this is something that actually, like in conversations with Joel, like helped me to think about, is that we have to like start a little bit, like go back a little bit to actually talk about, like what even is the news and what's a journalist? Because I think in order to know why is it a problem if somebody's just tweeting random stuff, like to know that journalism is a profession that people choose, and what does it mean to be a journalist at the Washington Post versus somebody who's tweeting from their living room. And that's not something that I've ever really unpacked before. I'm just like, oh, journalists do what journalists do. So really taking time to think about even that. And then I think we need to think about why, like learn a little bit more background knowledge about left and right media and how that operates, so that when they go into the lessons um, that they'll have more to operate with to determine if sources are reliable. But they did get, over the course of the year, they did get better. I loved seeing them like even go further to some of the lessons to like really try to dig into, is this news source reliable? So as 12 or 13-year-olds, they don't know automatically, is the Washington Post reliable? So they have to go to that next step to figure that out. And that was really cool to see kids doing that.
Were there other kinds of things that the students were able to do in your social studies class? Were there things that were easier for you to assign or easier for you to expect of students now that they had these fundamental skills? Like, are there other parts of your class that worked better because their research skills were strengthened?
Yeah, I loved that now they had this language. And so when we were studying other things or they were researching, I had one student who would always just like holler out who's behind the information. And it kind of
That seems like a great kid to have in class.
It
The kind
is.
of,
I was
who's
like,
the
yes,
source here? I demand to know. That's great.
every single time. I want you to like, even on the websites we assign you, like go on Khan Academy and do these things. Like, yes, make a habit of going to find out who's behind this. Is somebody making money? Is it not? Is it not for like find out just because that's how you're spending your time. And so I felt great, like to know that my students now felt empowered anytime to say, who's behind this? And, while some teachers might feel like, oh, that's making me nervous, it's like, no, let's find out. We're always doing that and like reevaluating, and we might find out something we really liked isn't that great anymore. So that's what we do as adults. So to start fostering that for them was wonderful.
What advice would you have for teachers who are just starting to adopt the Civic Online Reasoning curriculum? If you were to do it again, what might you do differently in another pass?
So what really worked for me is that I taught the lessons to multiple classes, and I would usually teach it to one class and then I wouldn't teach it to the other classes until a couple days later, so that I had time to think about how I wanted to modify it. I really loved that they had the student materials. And so I used the student worksheets. I found out that sometimes like the wording on, is this source reliable? My students would get confused about which source we were talking about. And so really taking the time to say, I'm going to try it with the class, and then how can I modify it? And really thinking of ways for it to be engaging. I mean, it is engaging anyway, but how can kids really get involved in it? So I know that with one of the lessons, we played like philosophical chairs where you take the sides of the room to say
Yep.
it was a question of which source, was it source A or source B that's more reliable about this topic. And we have a protocol for how we debate things in a positive, collaborative way. And so, but it was, I mean, the room was up in arms about their sources, and I'm like, this is amazing, this is great. And so I find that the curriculum has ways to build in other activities that gets kids up and out of their seats. Someday we get to have kids up and out of their seats.
Yeah. So it sounds like you took a lot of things sort of out of the box, tried them with one class, and then when you did it with your second or third classes, you'd make some modifications and you'd add some more materials and you'd sort of put your own spin on it.
Yeah, like the Saturday Night Live, showed them a parody of the substitute teacher. I showed them Saturday Night Live to show them like, what's a parody? Like,
Yep.
It's not fake news, it's making fun of something. So that was really great. Bring Saturday Night Live in your classroom, you're good. So
yeah, that's terrific. Or the Key and Peele substitute
yes.
teacher skits.
Yes.
How are you planning on modifying some of these materials for COVID times? How do you imagine some of this working remotely or in hybrid circumstances? Have you thought about that piece yet?
Yeah, so I tried teaching this remotely in the spring, and it was really great because we had gotten some modified sources from the project that had to do with Illinois and everything. So having those sources that were actually relatable to now was so great and relevant for kids. I think I can be more aware as I am looking at social media to say, I mean, since I'm new to this, I haven't felt like, oh, I have the knowledge and the expertise to pick those sources. I've felt like that needs to be an expert, but it doesn't now that I've done it longer. Like I could have found that and said, what do you guys think of this? And then also when I tried this in the spring, I did it asynchronously. And so I recorded a video of me showing them a source and practicing kind of the I do, we do, and then I gave them one as kind of like the you do, which I think asynchronously is okay, but we lost all of that excitement. There's an excitement in the room as everybody's like going to their Chromebook to try to figure this out. Is this reliable? Can we trust this? And so we lost that. So this year I'm going to really work on doing that synchronously, and I think that it really lends itself to that, having all the kids in the meeting and showing them what we're talking about, and then letting them go. Well, not actually leave the meet, but take a minute now, open a new tab, and what do you guys think of this? What can you find out? And I think that we can recreate some of that same excitement that they had about trying to figure out if it's reliable or not, or what's going on with the source.
That seems like great advice. So, I mean, the way that I would parse what you just said is that there may be ways to asynchronously to set up a problem. There may be ways to asynchronously let students do some sort of independent investigation of it, but you probably want to make sure that like the discussion and the big reveal is something that might fit really well into your, live video time, because
Yes,
it lends itself to some discussion, debate, excitement, reveal.
yes, yes, and I think that it will be doable. Like it's actually something. At first I felt this loss of like, oh, that was so much fun in the classroom, but now I feel like, oh, that's one thing that we can really um, do synchronously remotely. Students I love the way watching kids like look at each other's Chromebooks and try to figure things out together, and like partnerships talking. So it won't be the same, but I think that we can recreate a lot of it remotely.
Do you have any other advice for teachers who are starting to use these materials about how to teach it, or about how to integrate in your curriculum, or any of those other kinds of things?
My advice is to do it, like try it, because that like it's just amazing what students are able to get from it, and you can sense the way that this is going to be something that they're going to be able to use throughout their lives. And so just be willing to try it. The lesson plans are great. So even if you just have to open it up and go with exactly what it says, and then do that. And if you have time to really go through it and modify it for your class, then do that. But regardless, just get it out there, give it a try, because it's been such a wonderful experience in the classroom. I'd also suggest that people find a colleague or a buddy to teach it with in their classroom, because having somebody to talk about how it went and ideas for modifying or changing is really exciting. I've really benefited from talking to colleagues, not at my school, but in the district when we've been teaching this together, about about how it went and what we could do differently and what our students knew and didn't know. So teaching this with a colleague is a great idea as well.
Yeah, it's so great when we can teach those things to students that we really feel like, wow, they're going to be able to use this for the rest of their lives. Well, Linsey Rose from the Chicago Public Schools, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.